Hello and welcome to DCTV's Primaries edition of Candidate Conversations. I'm Michele McCray, Member Services Coordinator here at DCTV. Today I'll be speaking with your candidates for delegate to the House of Representatives, Mayor, City Council Chair, and other City Council hopefuls from Wards 1, 3, and 5. As a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, DCTV will ask each candidate the same questions. We will allow about 5 minutes per response. Here are the candidates for the chairman of the City Council. We have joining us today on Candidate Conversations, Chairman Phil Mendelson, running for re-election as chairman of the City Council. Welcome, Chairman Mendelson.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad you're here. So let's get started. Of legislation that was considered by the DC Council over the past year, what do you think was the top 1 or 2 most important issues undertaken by the council? And is there anything you'd want to address further on those issues going forward?
Well, if I think about the last couple of years, I think of more than just 1 or 2 pieces of legislation. We passed a bill called Racial Equity Achieves Results, REACH Act, which set up a council office on racial equity and also required the mayor to set up a office on racial equity to look at all of the actions of government from a racial equity lens. That's one bill that I think is very important. A year ago, when we had the budget before us, we legislated what I call baby bonds, which is for children born in the district, born in poverty, that the government will set aside $1,000 a year for them in an account. That, of course, will grow with some interest so that when they become 18, they have money to go to college or to start a job. It can only be used for certain purposes, but it's meant to overcome the wealth gap, to give these kids, young adults, a chance. Another bill that comes to mind was the Department of Buildings Act, which breaks up DCRA. The current agency that's responsible for housing inspections and building permits, for enforcing the law against slumlords and protecting homeowners against illegal construction. The current agency has done a miserable job. I pushed through legislation over the mayor's veto to set up this new agency, Department of Buildings, that will be singularly focused on improving those outcomes with regard to legal construction and quality homes. Another bill that I put through the council is a bill that I call it the dyslexia bill. It has a longer title, but requires that our schools train their teachers to recognize kids with reading disorders, such as dyslexia, and then trains a number of teachers specifically in the science of reading so that those kids will learn how to read. Roughly 20% of the kids in our school system have a reading disorder. And of course, they don't know it, because, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but if it can be recognized, then they will learn to read and they will have a better chance to succeed. I think reading is a key to improving public education in the district, and this is an important step in that direction. That's more than 2 bills, sorry, but these were important pieces of legislation. So what more needs to be done with regard to the dyslexia bill? To follow up with oversight to ensure that the different school systems, DCPS, as well as the charter schools, are actually complying with the law and taking the steps necessary to improve reading achievement by our kids. Follow up with the new Department of Buildings. Well, we have the budget before us right now for next year, and I want to increase the number of housing inspectors and building code inspectors so that we get better compliance. So there needs to be continuing oversight in those areas. With the racial equity, that we continue to look at what we need to do to strengthen those offices. What the council's office is designed to do is to force us to look at every bill with a racial equity lens and decide whether the impacts are acceptable or we want to make changes in the law. I'll give you an example. The comprehensive plan that just went through the council actually last year was one of the first bills to have a racial equity impact assessment. We made a lot of changes in the drafting of that legislation so that the assessment came back positive. And that's exactly the way the process should work, that we're forced, this was all kind of in a way behind the scenes, but we're forced to deal with the question of what is the racial equity impact of what we're legislating, and make changes if we think we can get better outcomes.
Okay, thank you for that response. Now, Chairman Mendelson, last year you testified in support of DC statehood. What do you think would be the most effective next steps towards achieving statehood, and what is the chairman of the council's role in achieving statehood?
Well, I'd like to say that the next step is to get the 51 votes in the Senate so that the legislation passes, but we don't have 51 co-introducers, and the Senate is split. So I'm afraid to say that the next step is going to be to protect how far we've gotten should Congress flip and be Republican controlled. I'm hopeful that won't happen. If it doesn't happen, that is, the Democrats remain in control, then the next step is to get the 51 votes in the Senate. And the House has already approved the Statehood Admissions Act. The role of the chairman is unique among council members because I represent the council. I represent the legislative branch. So I'm the one who goes up to the Hill. I'm the one who talks to members of Congress. I'm the one who testifies. I'm also the one who works with the mayor so that the government presents a united front to Congress in the push for statehood. I have oversight over the Statehood Commission, which is the three elected, we call them shadows, as well as the mayor and myself. And I continue to push the shadow delegation to come up with a plan for how they're going to get support from the states that in turn will lobby their members in Congress so that we get more support and we can get statehood through. Statehood, I hesitate because this almost sounds cliche, but is the last frontier with regard to human rights, or civil rights in this country. But if you think about it, the citizens of the United States who live in the district are the only citizens who do not have the same rights and responsibilities as the residents of the other 50 states. Our proposition is very simple. Give us the same rights. We get that with statehood. And so that's the goal. And in the meantime, there are incremental steps that we can take. And I'm not afraid to take those incremental steps. So a few years ago, I pushed hard and we I think I had to sue the mayor and the chief financial officer to get budget autonomy. But that means that we adopt our budget in the same way we adopt all of our laws, rather than sending a request which Congress has to adopt. I'm the one who pushed through the council electing our attorney general, so that rather than being appointed attorney general. So again, we have a greater democracy, if you will, in the district. Those are incremental steps. Recently, I introduced with Councilmember Che legislation that would give Eleanor Holmes Norton, our congressional delegate, full voting rights on the floor of the House if the measure is specifically related to the district. So it's kind of carving out a legislation that sometimes there's some bills that deal specifically and only with the district, that our congressional representative would have full voting rights on that. These are incremental steps. They're not fully satisfactory to me, because statehood is what will be fully satisfactory.
That's great work. Thank you. Now for our final question. What else would you like voters to know about you or your vision for DC?
Well, I'm running for re-election, and the primary is on January. Why did I say January? The primary election is on June 21st. So I ask for folks' support. I have a website that explains in some detail my positions with regard to public safety and affordable housing, delivering on progressive values, my record on the environment. And we're putting up a couple other pages concerning education and LGBTQ platform. So people can go to that website, mendelsonforchairman.com. I'll repeat, mendelsonforchairman.com, and learn more completely about me. My record, I talk a lot about my record, and then folks criticize me because I'm only talking about my record. My record does demonstrate my ability to get legislation through. My record does demonstrate my values, and there's much of my record that I want to continue. So part of my record is, what have I done in public education? Well, I mentioned the dyslexia bill to help kids overcome reading disorders. I will continue to work with regard to helping kids learn, focusing on reading as key, focusing on learning in our elementary schools as key. So my website, mendelsonforchairman.com, does talk about my record, but talks about what else I will be doing. My theme in this campaign is delivering on progressive values. These are values that we all share, like a quality education for all kids in our city, as an example. Other progressive values, such as affordable housing, so that anybody who lives in the city can continue to live in the city and not feel that they are economically forced out of their homes. I'd mentioned before baby bonds, strategies to overcome the legacy of racism with regard to the wealth gap, the achievement gap, the education gap. In fact, I've spent a lot of time on education because I think that's a long-term strategy to move the needle with regard to so many progressive social justice issues is what I mean to say. Delivering on progressive values, universal paid leave. I got that legislation through the council several years ago. It was fully implemented last year. We're actually seeing it's going to be expanded this year. All of that was put in place by legislation I authored, and will make a real difference to people who live in the district and who work in the district. This means that when you have a kid, you'll be able to take, I believe it's 8 weeks of paid leave, plus I think it's 2 weeks of prenatal care leave, paid leave, and out of a fund. Doesn't matter what the employer would have provided. This is a government required benefit. These are examples of progressive values. A couple of years ago, I put through legislation to implement the recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission, which reduced, or rather restructured, our income tax. So those who earn a lot of money pay a higher percentage of their income in income taxes. Those who earn a little bit of money pay a much, much smaller percentage of their income. And in fact, last year, I took the earned income tax credit, which we had increased in that earlier legislation, and transformed it into a guaranteed income. The earned income tax credit, anybody who works but doesn't earn a lot of money is eligible for the earned income tax credit, which is a payment, both a federal payment and a district government payment. And that payment can be in the thousands of dollars, and we're now going to divide that payment by 12 so that it's a check every month. That's guaranteed income to working families. Again, example of progressive value that I've delivered on, and this is what I will continue to work on, is these kinds of progressive issues and delivering on them. I want to say one other thing, and that is I'm running for re-election to the council, but I'm also running for re-election as chair of the council. So I can talk to you about where I am on issues and how I've been able to deliver on those issues. But as chair, I have the unique responsibility of representing the council, leading the council, getting consensus from council members so that we get legislation through. I like to say that we are far more productive than the other legislature that's in town. And that's because of what I'm able to do as chair of the council. And so that's important as well. Having the experience on the council, the skill to lead the council, and that's why I ask for folks' support in my re-election. June 21st, and the website is mendelsonforchairman.com.
Chairman Phil Mendelson, thank you for your time and for doing great work in the community.
Thank you.
Joining us today is Erin Palmer, running for the chairman of the council seat. Thank you for being with us, Erin.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, we're glad you're here. Now, Erin, of legislation that was considered by the DC Council over the past year, what do you think was the top one or two most important issues undertaken by the council? And is there anything you would want to address further on those issues going forward?
That's a great question. So one of the subject matter areas that has come up very regularly in terms of council legislation is traffic safety infrastructure. So we've seen a number of pieces of proposed legislation recently to provide safer streets in terms of our traffic safety infrastructure. So things like the Walk Without Worry Act, which would include installation of things like raised crosswalks, and the Safe Routes to School Act, which would include some traffic safety and traffic calming around schools. And these pieces of legislation are really wonderful and important, and in many ways are from the ground up, because what we've seen at the community level and among advisory neighborhood commissions, I'm an advisory neighborhood commissioner in Ward 4, is that neighborhoods are really pushing for mechanisms to make streets safer to walk and roll on so that kids and seniors and everyone can get around the neighborhood safely. So in addition to those two pieces of legislation, there are a handful more, and they're kind of moving in tandem. And I think they're a wonderful package to keep street safety at the forefront. And I'm hopeful that they will move through the council. And then the proof is in the pudding. So it will take very strong government oversight to make sure that they're implemented and implemented well. Other things that have come up in the DC legislative arena, there are a number of measures to address racial equity. So we've seen legislation around baby bonds, which is funding to provide a bond to certain children as a measure of racial equity. And those steps I think are really wonderful as well. I'd love to see some more creative legislation around affordable housing, particularly as to how we use our public land. And interestingly, we've seen a proposal that just came out today from Councilmember Janice Lewis-George about the Green New Deal and social housing. And that seems very important and in many ways unprecedented. And I'm happy to see that and hopeful to dig into it. And I think we can do a lot more in terms of maximizing the use of our public land for both affordable housing, including deeply affordable housing, and green space that is community serving.
Thanks for that, Erin. Now, the next question involves DC statehood. Do you support DC statehood?
I do.
Great. What do you think would be the most effective next steps towards achieving statehood? And what is the chairman of the council's role in achieving statehood?
Yes. Well, I think one thing we can do to set ourselves up as a city for statehood is to have a really strong local government. And one of the things that I've worked on and put out is a proposed DC Council accountability plan, which talks about a number of mechanisms to strengthen the DC Council itself on the belief that a well-operating, modern, ethical, highly functional DC Council not only serves residents well, but increases our reputational stature. So the plan I've put forward includes mechanisms to strengthen the DC Council's legislative and oversight functions, including additional institutionalized nonpartisan support staff, and reinstituting something that existed before, which is a nonpartisan research service that could help the council assess best practices across jurisdictions. That plan also includes a number of proposals for a more ethical DC Council, both to prevent any sort of ethical misconduct or appearance of misconduct. We know sometimes it's not even necessarily that something unethical is going on, but the appearance of something unethical can do damage to the reputation of an institution, and also to respond when ethical misconduct occurs. My plan also has some proposals to improve and expand the accessibility and inclusiveness of DC Council proceedings. So the idea that it should be easier for residents to participate in government and make their voices heard. And finally, it includes some discussion about protecting and supporting DC workers themselves. And again, all of this is presented on the belief that institutional accountability very much matters. And having a very strong DC council is, again, both good for residents and good for our reputational standing in terms of our quest for statehood. And there are plenty of states that have legislative issues, and that's not a reason why they should or should not have statehood. That's not the point I'm making, but I do think having a very strong local government sets us up for success in working towards statehood. I'd also love to see reinvigoration of a really meaningful community-led constitutional convention like we had in 1982. And I think that brings DC residents into the process, and that a community-led and a community-engaged process around DC statehood gives it all that much more meaning for residents and importance in the national landscape. The role of the DC Council chair is very important. The chair is in some ways kind of the head of the council, so is a spokesperson for DC statehood on behalf of the DC Council. And that requires a very strong collaborative working relationship with the mayor, as well as other entities that work on statehood issues. And one of the things I think I bring to the table is the ability to work very collaboratively with others, particularly when there's a common goal, which achieving statehood would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Now for our final question, what else would you like voters to know about you or your vision for DC?
That's a great question. Well, I'm a mom to 3 school-age children, and I'm sitting here in my basement, which is where I do my work, and they're upstairs kind of clunking around. We had to have the conversation. Mom is going in to do something. She's going to be recorded. Please try and keep it down. But they are very much just a part of my life, a part of what motivates me. They remind me that what I think about when I think about public service is the idea that it's a daily practice, that I want them to consider community service and civic engagement as something that we do every day, something that we engage in and give back to the community. They also inspire me on a lot of issues, including strong public schools, access to healthy foods, and all kinds of things. So being a mom is very much a part of who I am. It's part of what drives me to be a public servant, and gives me some interesting perspectives about all kinds of things, including work-life balance. I also think it's important for people to know about me that by profession, I'm an ethics lawyer. And most recently, I worked for the federal judiciary on ethics and institutional accountability issues. And the judiciary, like many institutions, faced its own Me Too movement, and had some number of judges accused of workplace misconduct, primarily revolving around sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. And part of what I worked on was supporting a working group of judges that considered institutional reforms within the judiciary to ensure better accountability and make sure that the judiciary was better equipped to both prevent sexual misconduct in the workplace and to respond and hold judges accountable. Part of that was increasing what's called bystander intervention, and the idea that a judge who knows about misconduct by another judge has an obligation to take some sort of action. And that is a pretty common sense principle, but in some ways is kind of tough in terms of the judiciary's culture of being very deferential, that each judge owes a lot of respect to another judge. So the skill set that I think I got from that work is not just knowledge about institutional accountability and best practices for an ethical workplace, but also how you move institutional reform through an entity, particularly as to itself, as to holding itself accountable, because most people, most institutions are not very adept at holding themselves accountable. So thinking about how you build that into the system and the value that it adds to the institution. One of the things I loved about my job is that the judges I worked with took took the work so seriously because they had such a strong belief in the value of the judiciary and the value of having integrity and being able to uphold the third branch of government. And that I really internalized. And I think it's very much a part of how I view government and government service as an act of almost love for the institution, that you believe in holding it accountable because you want it to be the best that it can be. So those are some things about me that I think are important and relevant and make me well suited for the position of DC Council Chair, which sets a lot of the practices and procedures for the DC Council and its operations. Thank you.
Erin, on behalf of DCTV and all of us here at Candidate Conversations, we thank you for the work you do in the community and thank you for your time in joining us today and continued success on your campaign.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
We have with us today Anita Bonds, running for the seat of at-large council member. Hello, Anita.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for being with us on Candidate Conversations.
Thank you for this wonderful invitation. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we'll get started with the first question, which is, of legislation that was considered by the DC Council over the past year, what do you think was the top one or two most important issues undertaken by the Council? And is there anything you would want to address further on those issues going forward?
Well, those are really, that's a wonderful question, because I think as a government and as a city, we did a tremendous job in looking after our residents as it relates to their housing. And so I have to say the fact that we immediately put in place the measures that would make sure that people were going to stay in their homes, that they could not be evicted. I think that has to be number one. And I guess number two would be the process that we use to make sure that they had the money to pay their rent, because so many of our residents were out of work, and particularly our residents that needed it the most. So I'm very proud of those pieces of legislation and the work that we did in that regard. And if I had a subset of those, I would certainly have to speak to the fact that we pretty quickly got our population and vaccinated. So those would be my points as to what we have done. We're trying to come out of it now. This pandemic has been devastating. As you know, our economy is down about 30%. I think restaurants and a few of the other businesses are beginning to come back in neighborhoods, but downtown is not moving as quickly as we would like it to. And as you know, over the last 10, 20 years, we placed a lot of emphasis on our downtown core. And so this is problematic for us, but we're working every day to bring our industries back. And we have millions of dollars that we're putting in the community, our commercial community, to make sure that we can help them to the best of our ability now. And there'll be more, I'm sure, because cities thrive on their downtown processes. And we are, as you know, a government town where many industries, service type industries thrive. And so we want to make sure that we keep that. That's been our tax base. Our commercial real estate community has been one of the biggest contributors to our now $19.5 billion annual budget. And so we want to keep the services that the taxpayers' dollars have been able to provide. And the only way we can do that is build up again. And so I'm looking forward to us doing everything we can to make that a reality.
Great, Anita. Thanks for that work too. Now, our next question has to do with DC statehood. Do you support DC statehood?
100%. In fact, I know one answer. Yes.
Okay, well, what do you think would be the most effective next steps towards achieving statehood, and what is the at-large council member's role in achieving statehood?
Well, I'll start with our role. And I think more than anything, we have to keep the issue of statehood before the public. And that's the public here. And to remind the public here, our residents and our businesses and institutions, that they have a responsibility to reach out to others in the various states, because as you know, this matter will be decided by Congress. And we do not have a vote on the floor of Congress. And so we have got to do everything we can to reach those that have representation that votes in the halls of Congress. So that's what I think we need to do. I think also one of the things that we are saddled with now is DC is a town. Our hometown is where there's always breaking news. And if it's not one thing, it's another. And here we are today with the whole issue of what has happened and what we anticipate to be permanent by the Supreme Court as it relates to our abortion rights. And so I think we have to tag on to that. And yesterday, when we had an opportunity at Planned Parenthood to speak, the mayor, our delegate Congress, and of course the council members, my perspective was, of course, we've got to remind people to vote. And that means to vote in these states where, it does make a difference, where the law of the land, the law of the people is being challenged. This whole thing that we think we're about, democracy, is being challenged. And when you say to more than half of the population in America, us women, that you are going to control how we handle our bodies, this is a no-no. But we cannot express it any better way than through the vote. And so that's where I am concerned. And it may mean that some of us who are locked in our various campaigns here in the district will have to, stretch and work with those in other states that are going to be dearly affected and can change things at the Congress.
Thanks for that, Anita. Now, for our final question, what else would you like voters to know about you or your vision for DC?
Oh, my vision for DC. Well, firstly, obviously, I love DC. I've been active here much of my life, and I grew up in Ward 7, raised my family here, went off to college in California, came back, raising my family, having a family and raising a family, and have been immersed in the community ever since. When I say I love DC, there's so much that we can do to improve the quality of life for everyone. And I do say everyone. I care deeply about eradicating poverty. I know that it is well and alive here, strongly alive here in the District of Columbia. And we also have the needs of those that we're trying to bring to DC and to have them to become homeowners. We need their tax dollars. More importantly, we need them here. If you work in DC, we want you to have a home in DC. So those are the kinds of things that I look at when I say I love DC. And our school system, my goodness, we have to do everything we can to make sure that our system is a strong learning vehicle for our young people. I'm a product of DC schools. My children and my grandchildren are part of DC schools. And so it's very, very important that we do everything we can to improve the quality of learning, make sure that they have devices, and things are kind of modern now. And we need to step up to the plate and make sure that our families are attended to. And bottom line, we want our communities to be safe. And so when I think about Washington, DC, I think about it as a place where I felt safe growing up. And so now it's a little less so. And I hear that complaint wherever I go. And so what does that mean? That means we want to have police. We want to see them in the community, on the streets. That's where we need to see our police officers, because that does give at least the older community a sense of comfort that there is someone there if they need them. I think too, we have to remember that we're at this point because we need to do intervention with our young people, our young adults. There's the missing ingredients in their life, and we have to get on with that. That is about jobs, but it's jobs training, and it's about mental health services, and really just helping people to navigate this new world, which is totally different from 20 years ago. This new world where there are a lot of influences. And so I want to work on those kinds of things that will help us to become a strong community again. And I am about all of us. And when I say all of us, it's pretty hard to distinguish one part of us from the other. I know that racial equity is a big issue, and we have to address that and try to change some of the practices that have brought us to this, not so happy, state of affairs.
Anita Bonds, running for the office of at-large City Council member. Thank you for being here on behalf of Candidate Conversations on DCTV.
Thank you very, very much. And should I leave my phone number? 202-919-1284. Give us a call. We'd love to have you.
Or you can leave your email address as well.
All right, that is, you can call, email Anita at anitabonds2022.com. And I'd love to hear from you and work with you. Come on, we got a lot to do. I need you and I want you. That's more importantly.
Thank you. We thank all the candidates for joining us. The District of Columbia will be holding its primary elections on June 21st, 2022. We'll see you this fall ahead of the general election in November. For DCTV, I'm Michele McCray.